Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It is a pleasure for me to be back in Japan, and I want to thank the Sasakawa Foundation for making my visit here possible. My subject today is U.S. Middle East policy, and especially the role of the Israel lobby. The Israel lobby is not the only factor that influences U.S. Middle East policy, but it is probably the most important. The lobby is the main reason why the United States has a special relationship with Israel. It is the main reason why the United States has been unable to broker a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, and I believe it is the main reason why the United States is confronting Iran and may, in fact, use military force against Iran, although I think that is unlikely. Now, this is not just an important topic for Americans. It is also an important topic for people in Japan. As you all know, this is a subject that can be very controversial. I want to emphasize that I am not talking about some kind of conspiracy, some kind of secret Jewish cabal to control American foreign policy, or anything like that. That's all nonsense. Rather, I'm talking about the political activities of a set of interest groups, which include both Jews and non-Jews in the United States, and groups that work openly and legitimately in the American political system. Israel gets about $3 or $4 billion of economic and military assistance from the United States every year. That is the equivalent of about $500 for every Israeli citizen. Even though Israel is no longer a poor country, Israel's per capita income is 27th in the world now. Israel also gets consistent diplomatic protection from the United States, for example, in the Security Council. And we almost always take Israel's side when there is regional conflict or when there is a regional dispute. So what is the Israel lobby and how does it work? The lobby is a loose coalition of individuals and groups that works actively and openly in the American political system to promote unconditional U.S. support for Israel. Final point I want to make about what the lobby is. Not all Jews in America are part of the Israel lobby, and some important parts of the lobby, such as the so-called Christian Zionists, are not Jewish. So to be part of the lobby, it depends on your political views, your political position, not your religion, not your ethnic background. And since the early 1990s, pro-Israel political action committees, which are fundraising committees, gave about $55 million to people running for office to help them get elected. By comparison, Arab American groups gave about $800,000 in that same period. So $55 million on one side, $800,000 on the other side. You can see why politicians listen more to one group than to the other. So one strategy is to use the various mechanisms of American politics to get people who support AIPAC's view elected to office or appointed to key positions and to shape policy in that way. But there's a second strategy. The second strategy is to try and influence public opinion in the United States so that Israel is viewed favorably by most Americans. And you do this by trying to influence how Americans talk about it and how American media talks about Israel. The bottom line here is that the lobby's influence explains why the United States backs Israel no matter what it does, and why much of American Middle East policy is intended to try to benefit Israel. It has been the official policy of every U.S. president since Lyndon Johnson in 1967 to oppose Israel building settlements in the West Bank. None of these presidents ever did very much to stop it, which is why there are now over 500,000 Israeli settlers living on the lands that were conquered in 1967. President Clinton, President Bush, and President Obama have all called openly for the creation of a viable, independent Palestinian state, yet none of them ever withheld American support for Israel or has done anything meaningful to pressure it to actually allow the Palestinians to have a state of their own. During the 2008 election, President Obama went to enormous lengths to demonstrate his strong support for Israel during the campaign. But then when he became president, he took several steps that suggested he was very serious about pushing hard for a two-state solution, which again had been American policy for some time, and because President Obama believed that that was best for all parties concerned. And then he gave a very important speech in Cairo in June of 2009, calling openly for the creation of a viable Palestinian state. And he said it was in America's interest, the Palestinians' interest, Israel's interest, and the world's interests. And in that same speech, he said quite unequivocally that the settlements must stop. Unfortunately, the Cairo speech was the high point of Obama's effort. When Obama called for Israel to implement a settlement freeze, AIPAC got 329 congressmen and 76 senators to sign a letter to Obama telling him not to put any pressure on Israel. In fact, because 2010 was an election year in the United States where Congress was up for re-election, Obama in that year began a major campaign to rebuild his connection with the American Jewish community. He met with 37 Jewish members of Congress and admitted he had made mistakes in pressuring Israel. President Obama began his first term firmly intending to achieve a two-state solution, but Israel and the lobby defeated him at every point. The influence of the Israel lobby is not the only reason why the United States and Iran have a difficult relationship. If Israel did not exist, and if there was no Israel lobby, the United States would still have had problems with Iran over the past 20 or 30 years. President Obama began by trying to engage Iran through several symbolic gestures, and by agreeing that the United States would participate in direct negotiations over Iran's nuclear program. But at the same time that President Obama was supposedly extending an open hand to Iran, the United States was also tightening economic sanctions against Iran and expanding covert action against Iran, culminating in the Stuxnet computer virus attack in 2010. Several Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated in this same period, probably by Israel, increasing the threat to Iran even more. Prime Minister Netanyahu was one of the speakers in Washington. He told the audience, quote, "Iran must never be allowed to get nuclear weapons." He declared containment was not an option. He said diplomacy had failed, and, quote, "None of us can afford to wait much longer." Now, President Obama tried to lower the temperature in his own remarks to the conference. He warned against loose talk about war. He repeated that he was committed to protecting Israel, but he also said, "I do not have a policy of containment. I have a policy to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon." A key point to understand is that the main advocates of using military force to try and solve this problem tend to be either groups or individuals in the Israel lobby, and it's hard to find anybody else in the United States that thinks that is the best way to solve this particular problem. If it were not for Israel and the lobby, there would be no serious talk of war. In fact, absent the lobby, the United States and Iran might well have worked out some of their differences by now. Again, I want to emphasize we would still have disagreements with Iran, and we would still be opposed to Iran getting nuclear weapons, but we would not be seriously considering using military force to try and achieve that. First and foremost, the United States should not have a special relationship with Israel. We should have a normal relationship. We ought to treat it the way we treat other democracies, supporting them when they do things we approve of and that we think are smart, and distancing ourselves when they're acting in ways that are contrary to our interests or that we think are not in Israel's interest. We should be committed to its existence, but not to its effort to colonize the occupied territories. Regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the United States should act like an honest broker and pursue an even-handed policy. Regarding Iran, threatening them with military action or regime change just makes having a nuclear deterrent more appealing. Attacking them directly will almost certainly persuade Iran's leaders that they need to get a deterrent of their own. The United States should therefore rethink its entire approach, take the use of force off the table, and agree to allow Iran to enrich at low levels under full inspections. To do these things would require the Obama administration to stop allowing American Middle East policy to be so heavily influenced by AIPAC and the other groups in the Israel lobby. And finally, I believe America's allies should do more out of their own self-interest as well. Current U.S. policy tends to make oil more expensive, which is bad for any country that imports oil. Current U.S. policy helps inspire extremist groups like Al-Qaeda and gives them new ways to recruit new followers. Current U.S. policy makes it harder for our other allies in the Middle East to strongly support the United States because that position is not popular with their own populations. And finally, current U.S. policy forces American presidents and their advisors to spend huge amounts of time and attention worrying about a small country with less than 8 million people, even though that country routinely does things that the United States asks it not to do. The more time, of course, we spend worrying about the Middle East, the less time we have to devote to other critical interests in the world, other vital regions like East Asia, and other allies like Japan. It is therefore in Japan's interest for the United States to have a smarter Middle East policy, and I would like to ask you to make this clear to American officials and other visitors every chance you get. You should make it clear that you think American policy on these issues is misguided and that you think the United States should change its position. Why? Because a different policy would be good for the United States, good for Israel, good for the other countries in the Middle East, and good for Japan as well. Thank you very much. I'll be delighted to take your questions. I think the Arab Spring makes Israel and therefore makes also groups in the lobby very nervous, and understandably so, because they now live in an environment that is very unpredictable. And so if I were Israeli, I would be more concerned about the environment I was living in. To me, that's tragic, because Israel, for its own sake, I believe needs to pursue peace much more energetically They should have done much more earlier when it was easier, and now it's going to be even more difficult given all the unpredictable things going on around them.